Each day at 4 o'clock, John McMullen joins the Sports Bash here on 97.3 ESPN. I'm Josh Hennig along with Deshaun Hendricks and Nick Costco here in the Matt Blatt Kia Studios. And of course, the Eagles have finally arrived at the NovaCare Center today. And as always, John McMullen, who covers the Eagles for us, is all over the happenings. I believe the first practice is tomorrow, right, John?
Correct. Tomorrow at noon. So today is just players reporting, taking physicals, more of a, as they call it in the business, a TV day where you can see Carson Wentz walk into the building, but there's no player availability. So everything will ramp up tomorrow at noon, and Doug Pederson speaks after practice tomorrow.
I'm glad you brought up Doug Pederson because we played the audio cuts from Louis Riddick earlier here on the Sports Bash. He talked about Doug Pederson, about how Doug Pederson was the coach he was most impressed with of all the coaches he worked with. Remember, Riddick played for Bill Belichick and under Nick Saban. He worked with Andy Reid and Pederson and Nagy and Sean McDermott, and he singled out Doug Pederson. He said Pederson was an X and O savant. He's a great communicator with the players, about Pederson understands the quarterback position. And it's amazing, John. Just a year ago, we had the garbage that was Michael Lombardi saying that Doug Pederson was unqualified. A year later, everybody and their cousin is coming out praising Doug Pederson.
Yeah, but I'm going to toot my own horn. I was the one guy who was saying all that stuff last year, especially the communication aspect of it. And I talked about that really dating back to when Sam Bradford was still here. And Sam was upset after the Eagles drafted Carson Wentz. That was the first sign I said Doug Pederson's got a chance to be good, and it had to do with how he handled things behind the scenes, how he communicated with players. And then Lewis is right as far as he understands the quarterback position. I mean, he's not only played it for a long time, obviously a long-time backup, but if you think about some of the players he was behind, specifically Dan Marino, Brett Favre, Donovan McNabb here, and then you think about some of the coaches, Don Shula, Mike Holmgren, Andy Reid. These are the people Doug Pederson learned under. That's why I shook my head when Mike said that. Mike knows a lot about football. I'm not one to criticize him there. It's just strange. But remember, when Doug was hired, it was portrayed as he was not ready. He was not prepared. And I always laugh. And I always, for some reason, professional sports, and I use Derek Fisher as an example in the NBA as well, people ignore experience playing and say it's not experience. How is being in the league for 13 years not regarded as experience? But when you become a coach, people forget about that for some bizarre reason.
Now, John, when you think about Doug Pederson now, before when he first came in as the Eagles head coach, he was a little timid, a little hesitant with his answers, didn't really own the media, so to speak. Now that he has more of a swagger around him, he's more comfortable in the building. Obviously, winning a Super Bowl helps. Do you think you're going to see a more lax attitude from Doug Pederson this season, or is he going to keep his foot on the gas, especially now that training camp is kicking up again?
No, he's the same guy. He's very comfortable in his own skin. He really hasn't changed all that much. I think the juxtaposition between him and Chip Kelly, Chip was a very witty guy. He's very good on his feet, won every press conference. And Doug came in, and if you asked him a question, the novel idea was he would actually think about it and try to answer it. And sometimes he would hem and haw because he was trying to give you a legitimate answer instead of a cliche or words of wisdom he learned somewhere along the line. And I think people took that the wrong way. And it's not about winning press conferences. It's about winning football games. And today, if you put him in a press conference situation, he's not going to be as good as Chip Kelly, but who cares?
Moving over to the quarterbacks and the actual players that are coming in now. We're actually going to see him now for the first time in a few months. Carson Wentz, there's a report that he might be going on the PUP list, at least for the time being. He's going to be a little bit limited in training camp. Do you see that as a really big deal, or is it kind of just a precaution just to make sure he comes along nicely and he's ready for week one?
No, I think it's a poor report. I think it's completely incorrect, and I don't understand it. And we'll see as he passes the physical. Remember, if you're on the PUP list, the only advantage is if you're on it throughout camp, you can go on the PUP list for the regular season and miss 6 weeks. Obviously, that's not the plan with Carson Wentz. The worst case scenario is him missing a game or two, not 6 games. So the Eagles already cleared him for 7-on-7 work, controlled work in spring. So why wouldn't they do that in training camp? It was a bizarre report. I don't think it's accurate. I don't think he'll start on the PUP list. I think he'll be doing exactly what he did in the spring, and that's individual work and some 7-on-7 work. And then that will slowly ramp up to team drills later in the summer.
Now, it almost seems ludicrous at this point, but when you talk about Nick Foles, he's going to be taking the first-team reps while Wentz cannot do any team drills. They have quarterbacks behind him as well. But, everybody always wants to ask, is Nick Foles going to stick around this season? I mean, it almost seems it's ridiculous to even entertain the notion that they could still trade him at any point this year. I mean, you got to think that Foles is here at least for this year, for the entire year, just in case anything goes bad with Wentz. But, I mean, is there any sort of shot where if they are blown away with an offer, are the Eagles confident enough in Nate Sudfeld to be the backup to Wentz at some point this season and ship Nick Foles out?
Yeah, I think they would trade him tomorrow if they could get 2 first-round picks. I think they're comfortable enough in Nate to be a competent backup, but they're not going to give Nick Foles away. They said that consistently. I think they're shooting for the stars. I think the only way it's going to happen is if another sort of lightning strike. Same thing happened with Minnesota. Teddy Bridgewater goes down 11 days before the regular season. I pointed to Tampa Bay. If they decide that the blowback was too much with Jameis Winston, I could see them making a move, but it hasn't manifested itself. So I think it's very unlikely the Eagles would trade him, but they certainly would if the right offer is there.
John, going national now, the NFL executives did, an annual poll with the starting quarterbacks, and they ranked Patrick Mahomes next to last among the starters, which, if you think about it, is fair. He hasn't really played. But for those who aren't really, familiar with Patrick Mahomes, what can Andy Reid maximize when it comes to his potential?
Well, he's got tremendous arm strength. He might have the strongest arm we've seen since Brett Favre. That's number one. But yeah, I think I had him 28th. I don't know where else you could possibly put him if you're rating the starting quarterbacks. And that's not an insult to him. He's got a tremendous ceiling as a player. And when we talk a year, maybe 2 years down the line, he might be a top 10 guy. But right now he's unproven. So I'm not sure where you could put him. Obviously, Andy Reid has a ton of confidence in him. They moved on from Alex Smith, who's been a very successful quarterback there. So all of that is positive, but with any young quarterback, I think you're going to see some growing pains.
Sticking with quarterbacks, everybody likes to talk about this time of the year. How long is it till first-round rookie quarterbacks play? And starting with Baker Mayfield, there's a report out there that there's a good chance he might not even see the field this year with Tyrod Taylor starting. When you look at that situation in Cleveland in general, is it more about Hugh Jackson keeping his job, or is it about John Dorsey saying, okay, here's your last chance, I'm getting my own guy anyway?
Well, I think Hugh has to show significant improvement to keep his job, number one. So, yeah, he's more likely to lean towards the veteran quarterback anyway. And now that they have at least a competent veteran in Tyrod Taylor, it's a lot different than last season. And that's the Browns' plan. But I always caution everyone that that was the Bears' plan last year as well, and it lasted all of 3 weeks when Mike Glennon looked atrocious. So I don't think Taylor's proven himself enough to know, he's not going to be terrible. He's not going to turn the football over. they're going to be a much improved team simply because they can't be worse than they were. They were 0-16, and they are going to win some games. And Tyrod's going to get a lot of credit for that. So I think it is a good situation to where you'll probably get to the second half of the season, barring injury, before Mayfield is out there. But once you are out of the playoff hunt, and the Browns are not going to be a playoff team, that's when you start to look at the young quarterback, and that's when I think they'll pull the trigger.
John McMullen with us. You can follow him on Twitter at JFMcMullen. John, sticking with the rookie quarterbacks, out of the 5 first-round picks, I know we just mentioned Mayfield, but Darnold, Rosen, Allen, and Lamar Jackson, out of those 5 in that were drafted in the first round, who do you expect to take the field first? I mean, frankly, I would say we see all 5 of them on the field at some point. I mean, Lamar Jackson could be a different story considering they have packages for him, but every other quarterback seems to be in a situation where they are in position to take over the starting job at some point this year.
Yeah, I agree with that, but I also say it's a better year than most for teams bringing in good bridge quarterbacks. Now, that might be an oxymoron by general to say you have a good bridge quarterback, but what I mean by that
seems counterintuitive almost.
Yeah, at least competent guys. And I talked about Taylor, and the Jets have either Josh McCown or Teddy Bridgewater, depending on which way they go. The Bills brought in A.J. McCarron. The Cardinals brought in Sam Bradford. So all of those guys are at least okay if they're not going to embarrass you. So that's different than most years, to be honest. I've always pointed to Rosen, said that earlier in the week, simply because I don't think Sam's going to be healthy. But they also have Mike Glennon, so that plays into it as well. I think you're right. I think all of them will get on the field at some time, with the exception of Lamar Jackson. If Lamar gets on the field, it will be because of injury or a package, a trick play here and there, but not consistent play. Because Baltimore's too good a football team. They'll be in the playoff hunt. Joe Flacco is going to be the quarterback. The other 4 teams are not going to be playoff teams. So ultimately, same thing I was talking about with Cleveland. At some point, they'll pull the trigger to get the young guy on the field.
I wanted to go back to what you said before about Tampa Bay and Jameis Winston. That kind of ties into another discipline issue that could be coming up with LaShawn McCoy with the Buffalo Bills. You know, both those guys have had their off-the-field issues. Winston, we know it looks like he's going to be suspended for those 3 games. McCoy, his situation has yet to be resolved. I mean, where do you see this ending for both guys? One for Winston, I mean, is his time at Tampa Bay looking like it's going to end? And for LaShawn McCoy, it could be the same thing if this comes out. I mean, what do you expect the ending to both these cases to be?
Well, I mean, Jameis is suspended for 3 games. He's accepted it, and then they'll move on from there. This is obviously they picked up his 5th-year option, but that's only guaranteed for injury. So they can walk away from that if he has a poor season. So I think a lot of it has to do with how he plays, and that's a very difficult division. I think if he has a mediocre year, if he doesn't show vast improvement, if he's been the same guy he has been, they probably do look to move on because they don't want the public relations hassle of dealing with him. But I also think Tampa Bay is a little bit surprised it hasn't been as bad as they expected. So we'll see as that moves on. With LaShawn, I mean, that's a crazy story. You just don't know who's telling the truth yet. And until we know, if he has nothing to do with it, obviously there's nothing to do with him, and he can continue on his career. If he's guilty of those accused allegations, yeah, he's gone. He's done. You'll probably never see him in the NFL again. But it's too early. The evidence is not there, and we don't know if the allegations are true.
One more thing on quarterbacks. You mentioned Teddy Bridgewater before and how he's in a kind of a weird situation with Josh McCown. Of course, they drafted Sam Darnold. You know, Bridgewater seemed to be the future franchise quarterback for the Vikings, and then, of course, the freak injury happens. They get Bradford. Now they've moved on to Kirk Cousins. For Bridgewater, I mean, you also mentioned Tampa Bay. If it doesn't work out with Winston, I mean, could you find Tampa Bay to be a nice fit for Teddy Bridgewater? And I know moves at the trade deadline are very rare in the NFL, but could you see a situation where Bridgewater is moved before or during the season, and could that possible destination be Tampa Bay?
Yeah, I mean, he proved he was on his way to being a good starting quarterback. So everything revolving around Teddy Bridgewater has to do with health. That was a catastrophic injury. If the trainer, Eric Sugarman, there did not do the proper things that he was able to do, he could have lost his leg. That's how bad that injury was. And everybody will be watching this training camp and seeing, can he hold up? Can he play from a physical standpoint? And if he shows that, I think ultimately he'll be a starting quarterback in this league again. Obviously, it's not going to be long-term with the Jets because they drafted Sam Darnold. But as we all know, every time you get to the offseason in this league, there's multiple teams looking for quarterbacks, and he will get another chance somewhere. It could be Tampa. We just talked about Winston. Could be somewhere else. But this is a very, very important training camp for Teddy Bridgewater because he's got to convince people that he's healthy and he's going to stay healthy, because that injury is an injury that not a lot of people will come back from. And that was the caution and why he couldn't get even a mediocre deal this offseason.
And, John, as you talk about that, and Nick just made a great point with those quarterbacks that could be moved this offseason as far as who needs to start, because we all know that injuries happen in training camp. They happen in preseason games. Somebody's going to need a quarterback going into the season. It's just the nature of the beast. It happens. We don't wish it upon anybody, but it's more likely that it happens. And me and Josh talked about it earlier in the show that Bridgewater was a guy, but also RG3, because of the nature of them having one more preseason game and him getting more time, because Joe Flacco rarely plays in the preseason. And Lamar Jackson is a rookie. You know, he's going to get some time. But RG3 is the guy that they're going to give a lot of time to in this preseason. Who is the most likely between Griffin, Foles, and Bridgewater? Do you see if there's a team that needs a quarterback that they're going to go after first because of Nick Foles having such a high price tag?
Yeah. I mean, Nick's the least likely because the Eagles want the world for him, and I just think they're overshooting. So the other guys, I mean, look, RG3's been out there for a while. There hasn't been a ton of interest in him. I think people are sort of piqued by the potential of Teddy Bridgewater and what he showed at one time in Minnesota. And the Jets have sort of been doing this proactive campaign to say every day in the offseason how great he's looked, and that's with the eye on trading it. So I would think of those three names, he's the most likely to be moved because the Jets are very, very comfortable with Josh McCown as sort of a mentor to Sam Darnold, as they should be. I mean, the guy's been playing forever. He's seen it all. He's done it all, and he's not going to make waves as far as, obviously, at his age, 38, 39, whatever he is. It's not going to make waves as Sam Darnold takes over the team. So I think of those three, if Teddy shows he's healthy, he would be very desirous for a lot of teams in this league.
John McMullen joins the Sports Bash every day at 4 o'clock on 97.3 ESPN. Check out all of his work covering the Eagles at 97.3 ESPN.com. And he covers the NFL for Get More Sports. And, John, the Eagles finally start practicing tomorrow. And then, I guess we're going to hear more of Doug Pederson saying that about the new norm, right? I believe we'll probably see that at least once tomorrow.
Yeah, I don't know if he'll mention it, but it's in the rotunda, so it's always ever looming. But, first day of camp, first practice, the Eagles have, I think, 87 players under contract as we speak right now. And I think there'll be probably 88 reporters, so it's going to be a struggle tomorrow. Oh,
so you all can be assigned one reporter per player. It's a perfect scenario.
Yeah, I've always joked about that. At some point, we're going to have a pool reporter for each player. That's how many people cover the Eagles, at least on certain days. By the time it gets to the second, third week, then it'll be just the same 15 curmudgeonly reporters that you all know and love.
Well, John, we always appreciate you coming on the Sports Bash, and we'll chat with you tomorrow.
Hey, thank you, guys.